Welcome to the Stewart Squared podcast, where normally we talk about everything, but try to mostly focus it on the rise of the personal computing industry, the internet, and the mobile phone revolutions, how it relates to AI and space. But AI is sort of like a meta technology, so it includes everything. And today we're going to talk about politics. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
which is a fraught topic for us
yeah.
because my son here has some very strange ideas about the political sphere. And of course, I'm always right. And his grandfather, my father, was a political reporter and had a very uh, prescient, uh, stable, reliable view of the world of politics.
Uh,
And so we have that in our genes. And ended up in, well, we'll see whether we're in different places or not, given the current situation.
Yeah, well, and I often think about what my grandfather would think about where we are right now. And he was at the time, he was an landed gentry, or his father was a landed gentry. And I found out that his father was a Republican, and he would give both Stewart and Joe a hard time because they were all wrapped up in FDR's New Deal, which was
Even earlier, they had real communist leanings.
uh, both both grandfather and great uncle Joe had communist leanings.
Grandfather for sure. Great Uncle Joe, it's a little harder for me to know because he was 4 years older than your grandfather. And so it went Great Uncle Joe, your grandfather, great aunt Teeny,
Mm.
Teen, and great Uncle John. So that was the order of birth. And
Mm.
so great Uncle Joe was the first of four kids. So he got the blast
Mm.
from
Mm.
his father.
Mm.
I never met my
Mm.
grandfather, your
Mm.
great grandfather. I met him, but I was too young to know it because he died when I was like two or three. Um, and so I have no personal experience with my grandfather and looking at pictures of him.
Mm.
But he was a Republican, and his wife, my grandmother, was also a Republican.
Oh, interesting.
And uh, my grandmother was chairperson of the Republican Party in Connecticut. So they were serious Republicans. And I remember that they grew up um, in the teens and aughts or 20s, I guess, the roaring 20s. And then there was a Great Depression, and Herbert Hoover was the president widely credited with causing the Great
Mm.
Depression
Uh-huh.
because he was so conservative. He didn't believe in any kind of assistance, which is why FDR became the first liberal
And
Democrat.
and and this we've talked about politics before, and we talked about the cycles, and FDR was the main big cycle that shifted everything. And this is what I always wanted. Yeah,
Tough. We've had a lot of these.
yeah,
Abraham Lincoln shifted things
yeah.
radically. Um, and even George Washington ran unopposed and decided voluntarily to step down for the second term. So we had a first competitive election after George Washington.
Uh,
So I mean, there's shifts going on all through our history, um, and and so you can go all the way back to the rebels versus the Tories,
yeah,
right? Those are the
yeah.
two. They weren't political parties, but the two allegiances. And there were plenty of people that thought we should remain a colony and not become an independent country. So you go all the way back and you can see shifts going all the way forward. And my view, and the reason I thought this would be interesting to talk about is we are currently undergoing a shift
Yep,
and nobody can tell exactly where we'll end up.
yep.
So
All the
now we have,
pieces are in play. All the pieces are changing, and they're going to settle. And we've talked about this before. Like the my view is that new settling is. So I think Trump represents your generation, and in a way that I think your generation is very torn apart by. I don't think Trump represents, and gets into the tariff stuff, which I think is probably a bad idea. I've been watching him talk about tariffs, and I think he's. So I won't go into that. We'll go into that later. But I think Milei represents the new right, and RFK Jr. represents the new left, and that will be the spectrum from now on. I
Wow.
think after Trump represents a sort of populism that is also represented by Bolsonaro and the Hungarian guy, and a lot of the European right, which is a very sort of nationalist, protectionist, like let's just try to hold on to what we had in the past. That's what Trump does a lot of. He does a lot of like, let's try to let's try to get back to where we were, which I don't think is possible.
That's what MAGA stands for.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's an alliance between Milei and Trump, but I don't think that alliance is a ideological one. I think that's a political one.
So when I started being an adult
Yeah.
50 years ago, it's debatable, might have been 40, but I considered myself a conservative.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a startling thing. But when I graduated from college, I did not say I was a Republican,
Yeah.
but I identified more with the fundamental premise of the Republican Party at the time,
Uh-huh.
which is pre-Reagan.
Yeah. Oh,
So
interesting.
Reagan was elected, and I kept it secret.
Oh, interesting.
I
From who?
voted Reagan.
Who'd you keep
Uh,
it a secret from the rest of the family?
or anybody else. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
rest
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
family. It
Yeah.
turned out at the same time that I was feeling conservative, the rest of my family was feeling
Going
liberal.
left this morning.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and it just led to some conflict, so I kept it on the QT. But I thought the way I always put it is I believed in the fundamental tenets of the country that we created,
Yeah.
which is based on freedom, individual liberty,
Yeah.
the pursuit of uh, what's the pursuit of happiness?
Life and property.
Life, liberty, and happiness.
Yeah.
And property wasn't part of the
Mm.
not that phrase. And we created a country in reaction to the one that owned us previously, Britain, and which had a king and a monarchy, and it was a constitutional monarchy, but
Mhm.
they actually had parliament, and they had a similar form of government, similar but different. So we broke off and said, look, we're going to do this thing, and we're going to have this checks and balances, and it's all based on the idea of a loosely organized federal government with state rights and individual freedom.
Mm.
And that I bought that hook,
Mm.
line, and sinker.
Mm.
So to some degree, I've watched the Democrats like go nuts. So I'm firmly in the belief that Joe Biden was the end of an era,
Mm.
not just because he's 81 now, but
Mm.
because he's been in politics for 50 years. His whole attitude was formed out of becoming a congressman in the 1960s,
Mm.
70s, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
At the next 50 years, trying to be president, finally got there, and he was determined to deliver on everything he'd done for the last 50 years, a lot of which was really good, right? His ability to be a statesman and other things was good, but he just started spending money like wild because he knew it was his last shot, right, to get everything that he wanted to do. And the Democratic Party lined up behind him, and they got everything they wanted, right? And they just went overboard. They just like lost touch with reality. And so people, and this is why your premise is a little, I have struggled with, because young people went for Trump.
Mm.
They were terrified of what Biden stood for, right? That was not a good future. And so they said, well, hell, if I got to choose between this old fart who's doing what he's been doing for the last 50 years and this other guy who's legitimately crazy
Mm.
and a severe lack of ethics, we'll go with that guy because at
Mm.
least he's different.
Mm.
And that was the only decision people were making. There was no kind of nuance to this decision. It was such a contrast between one and the other. And I'm sitting here going, well, no, not a lot. Some of what Trump says is legitimate, right? We
Yeah.
have lost sight of the kind of country we are.
Yeah.
So Make America Great Again is not just let's go roll back to the 60s or whatever. It's like
Part of
there's
it's
a
about the republic.
principle.
Part of it's about the saving the republic from what's happened.
Yeah, and yet to do that, he's basically saying he has to take complete control, and he's got it
Mm.
now. He's got all three branches, and he's going to use it to force the country back to where it was. But not bad. I don't think he has an intellectual principle behind that. It's just like this, he's found this is something that resonates with people, so he got elected again. I don't
Yeah,
think he has kind of inherent um, political structure in his head that he's trying to achieve. So we'll get some of what he does and some of what I want.
yeah.
But,
There's,
right now I'm actually thinking the people were right.
Yeah. So, okay. So there's a few things there. There's one which I would like to talk about the structure of government because I think you have some insight into that, which is how much power does the executive have, even with both houses of Congress. But I want to put a pin in that because you said something. You said that Trump is legitimately crazy. How do you know that Trump is legitimately crazy? What are the signs? What are the things that have gotten you there?
Well, his history as a human being, he's, you know, he's bragged about how he can fuck any woman he wants.
Hmm.
He's
Did you watch the full video there about him in deposition? What he was saying there?
No, I don't think I did.
Yeah.
Uh, but and I'm trying to find 2 hours to watch the movie, The
Uh,
Apprentice, because Valerie won't touch it, and I have to go do
wait.
that
What
later.
is The Apprentice?
It's a movie that was made about Trump,
Okay, I got
and
it. Yeah.
and it's not the show that he was in, but it's Apprentice, the movie.
Mm.
Uh, and look it up. He had a hard time getting it financed.
Oh, interesting. He made the movie. Interesting.
Yeah. No, he hated the movie. Trump
Okay. All
hates
right.
the
Yeah.
movie and is threatening to sue everybody that's
Oh,
involved with it.
yeah.
I don't think he's filed suit any yet right now, but so it finally got released in
Oh,
the
got it.
U.S.
Okay. Got it. All
and
right.
but
So
it went into not very many theaters. It's online now. You can rent it on Amazon
so
Prime
this is
Video.
this is a really interesting area because so what I'll give you my understanding of what's happened in the last few years. So you mentioned that the Democrats have gone a little crazy. Uh, Part of them going crazy. Would you agree that the Democratic establishment owns most of the media?
You see the fireworks going
I
on
do.
out
Yeah, that's a funny part where you
yeah,
never
maybe
seen
I
that.
should do this, and maybe I can get it to do it too. So it's like, come on now. You can't make it happen. It's like, drives me insane. Uh,
Uh, did the
so
Democrats own the media?
there's an
Mhm.
underlying thing here, which is really important to understand, which is the mechanics of governing.
Mhm.
And, um, Alexander Hamilton is the
Mhm.
guy who actually wrote the rules of the balance of power.
Mhm.
And, um, was as ironic because he was not a citizen at the time. And in fact, he was an illegitimate
Wow.
child of foreigners. Um, he was born in Bermuda or something like that. And it's real. The play Hamilton is based on a book about Alexander Hamilton. It's a really interesting read because it sort of shows where our roots come from beyond the people that opposed the Tories. Um, the but the mechanics of government have changed over time. And every time you change the mechanics, you're going like, okay, are you still adhering to what it was in the beginning?
Mhm.
And is this change that's required because now we're a modern society, or is this change
Yeah.
that's happening for another reason? The big change that happened that really explains what happened between Biden and Trump is that in the 1980s, the Democratic Party changed the way the primaries were
Mm.
run.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Um,
Yep. Hmm.
and it was all in the um, pursuit of reform, a
Yeah.
better system, one that was more representative.
Yeah.
Because what used to happen is the party controlled who got to be candidates, and it shifted from the party to the primaries. The primaries now determine who gets to be a candidate. So if you think about it, the one thing the Democrats didn't do this cycle was primaries because Biden was, the nominee. And so they never had a primary. Uh, and the Republicans did, and there were a lot of candidates for
Mm.
Republicans,
Mm.
right? And Trump won the primaries and then won the election. So the Republican Party actually went through a legitimate
Yeah.
cycle of choosing who was a candidate, but that's still done by popular vote, not by party mechanics. And
Yeah.
the party mechanics used to determine who candidates were,
Yeah.
whether it was Nixon or Kennedy or,
Yeah.
whoever it was, Reagan, et cetera. There was a process for choosing the candidate to represent a party. And so my whole belief goes back to parties don't matter anymore. Now it's all done by primaries, by elections, by popular vote,
And
which is ironic.
how does this relate to my question about owning the media, the Democrats owning the media?
I don't think they own the media, but Fox is every bit the equivalent of CNN. I mean, if you're just talking about traditional media,
Sure.
media is being redefined now, and they have this thing called
Yep.
MSM, which is mainstream media. And mainstream media is shrinking in terms of its influence, and everything else is taking over. And you can call it social media, but they're
Yeah.
like the free press. There are new media, there are organizations that report based on the way things are reported now, as opposed to having a legacy to deal with.
So yes.
That's a whole other topic to
Well,
talk
but
about.
well, no. So because I'm getting there, because there's something that happened, and it happened with this rise of the new media and the social media, where people stopped paying attention to longer form content, and most of what we receive is these short clips. And so yes, Fox. I think Fox actually started what I'm about to say, but then CNN and the rest. So Fox is over here. They're like this one thing owned by Rupert Murdoch that is counter to the rest. But you had MSNBC, CNN, all of those guys. Basically, they were all in lockstep. So whenever there was a narrative that needed to be expanded, they would say the same thing. There was no nuance there. And so why I asked that question about how do you know what Trump did? You go look at that deposition video because he was under a deposition when he said this thing that he could grab any woman. And there's a whole thing there in the deposition that never got publicity. And I would suggest any of the listeners to go watch that entire video. And as I said in the beginning, like Trump is not necessarily who I would, who I don't think Trump is a savior. I think he's an older guy. I do agree with you that I think he's been put in a position that has allowed him to act as the populist figurehead for a return to the original America. But I think that we're headed for territory which is going to be pretty different from what we're doing. But the main point I wanted to get across was that the media environment has changed significantly, and there was a constant sort of character attack on Trump, which I think doesn't represent who he is. So although I don't think that he is a enlightened master, I also don't think that he's the same person that was portrayed by this grouping of media.
Okay, I'm looking it up, and watch all released portions of Trump's deposition in E. Jean. So it's the E. Jean Carroll rape trial.
Probably. I don't know the specifics, but it's he was being under deposition.
It's 48, almost 49 minutes long.
Yep. Yep.
So you recommend that?
Yep.
Not because of that, but so what is it that you
So
saw in that?
so yeah. So there's a bunch of little clips. So here's another thing that I'm sure that is in your head that Trump did. So the January 6th. So what did Trump actually say about January 6th? And there's another important video there. So right after he lost, there's a video of him saying, "You got to go home. Don't do this. You got to go home. Like we can't." So what I'm trying to say by there's all these videos and so there's a short clip of him also saying, "You'll never have to vote again. You'll never have to vote again." And these are short 45-second clips that remove the rest of the context of what he was saying. And Trump is a very, very simple speaker. And he also brings a lot of
But I
improv.
understand what you're talking about. You're talking about the Trump fits the new media narrative, which is he speaks in clips, and young people and people that are into that get all their news from short clips. TikTok.
Oh, no. Not only young people, including every generation. Every generation.
Yeah, but at different levels, right? The older you are, the more you pay attention to more mainstream media. The younger you are, the less attention you pay to mainstream media.
That is what. Yeah, that I agree with that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
which I think I understand. I have to be careful how I say this, but our experience, I don't think I can say it without identifying.
Mm.
Anyway, I have reason to have a relationship with a young gentleman who spouts Trumpisms. And uh, he's a young gentleman who is not that well educated, and um, and he gets everything from social media.
Yeah.
And particularly from Twitter and Trump-like stuff. And so he just thinks that's the way it is.
Mm.
That's his frame of reference.
Mm.
And so it horrifies me because there's no intellectual process applied there to decide whether something is true or not, or at least factually relevant. And instead, it comes in one ear and it comes right out the mouth. And there is this, I think, age-old principle that education is a good thing, the ability to reason and just differentiate between stuff that is one thing or another, and apply a process there. And that's a classic sign of, an effete liberal white education, right? That you're taught how to think. But that goes all the way back to Greece.
Yeah. This gets into, education, which I think is going to change pretty drastically. It also gets into the legacy of Rome. I think that the United States, as is Russia, as Tsarist Russia tried to be, that is this legacy of Rome. So Rome collapsed, and everybody's trying to figure out how to get back there. And this is a new thing. You told me to write a book about it, I think 2 weeks ago, about the Western Hemisphere as the new Rome, and United States, Brazil, and Argentina as examples of the sort of a legacy of new Rome.
Go see Gladiator 2. We just saw it last night.
You told me about it. Yeah.
You'll identify because it's called The Dream of Rome, and how Rome dissolved because it never achieved the dream, and the dream
it goes into it goes directly into what we're talking about now, which is Rome had a republic. Caesar, who is this person that a lot of young men identify today as the savior of Rome, led to Rome's destruction because the republic could not stand. It's a complicated issue, but I think that the founders of the United States were trying to establish a republic which could succeed where Rome failed. And I think we did it. I think that I don't personally believe that Trump is going to be an authoritarian. I think that Trump was actually it has prevented the authoritarian, but the authoritarian piece is a different authoritarian piece than it was before, because back in Rome, the authoritarian was Caesar, crossing the Rubicon, coming back. And
but you have to be careful because Caesar's the one that established the Senate.
No, Caesar's not the one who established the Senate. Caesar, there was a Senate before Caesar. Caesar was a populist coming back to basically.
There was a Senate, yes.
Yeah.
Who established the Roman Senate?
Yeah, the Roman Senate goes all the way back to the founding of Rome.
Romulus, first king of Rome.
Yep, who's a mythical figure. And this is what I love about being in Buenos Aires, is that I go for a walk in Buenos Aires every day, and I see a picture of the Roman wolf with the two twins, one of whom is Romulus.
Exactly. Yeah, that's an image in the movie Gladiator 2.
Yeah. So coming back to today, how it relates today, I think so something that never happened in Rome. I did research this. There is a little bureaucracy. They did have to deal with bureaucracy. But really, something that happened starting with FDR was the rise of a bureaucracy, what many people call the deep state now.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that thing is the new form of authoritarianism, and it's decentralized. So it doesn't matter who the director of the NSA is, doesn't matter who the director of the FBI is. It's the people within the bureaucracy who are unelected and who are enacting political power in an unelected bureaucracy that we didn't see coming, except for a few people, like maybe my great grandfather, who saw the rise of the New Deal and was like, "That is going to lead to this," basically. Where like that's the main.
It's
Yeah.
your grandfather, not your great grandfather.
No. I'm talking about the Republican Connecticut
Oh,
guy.
you mean in
Yeah,
Connecticut?
yeah,
No, no, that was a reaction no, that I understand. FDR was not as popular as people think he was now.
mm-hmm.
Um, when he was first elected, it'd be interesting to see how much he won by, but he was really running against Herbert Hoover, who was so unpopular that,
Yeah,
wasn't a tough problem, and it was in the middle of the Depression. But he thought independently, and he created a new approach to government, and so
yep.
that's when the political order changed, and he
That's
started
but
something. It wasn't until LBJ and the Great Society
yes,
that
yeah,
you
yeah.
ended up with professional bureaucracy.
So yeah,
Um,
yeah, but he started it. He started the government intervention into the United States in a large scale. He started the seeds of the professional bureaucracy, and
yeah,
100% I agree that LBJ then that at the Great Society in the 1960s, when we were at our
yeah.
peak as a country, then formulated it. And this is the issue, the same issue with Rome, which is that all things pass, and so things
All things
started to
change.
collapse. Yeah, yeah.
All things change.
And yeah, all things change, and so things started to collapse, and I think that's where we were, and I think it was a very tricky position with the Democrats, because I think you have some points there, but I also think that there's this giant wave of unelected bureaucrats who enact political control, and I think that was the most dangerous thing to our republic.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
I define it in terms of, so we have a two-party system. We are the only country in the world that has a two-party system. All other democracies are some form of a parliamentary
Yeah,
system.
yeah.
And, I'm confused when they call it an election. It's like, well, how do you call an election before it's scheduled? I don't understand that. But there's some process in parliament that works that way. And that's true in all other democracies, literally. I mean, even the ones that were modeled on ours are
Yeah.
not the same as ours, like
Yep.
Japan and
Yep.
post World War II. And so we have this unique system, which is built, and parties are actually not in our Constitution or anywhere else.
Mm.
It's not a federal thing. It's what happened, right? So parties determine how they work, right? Like you try to think about, how does the party relate to who gets nominated to be elected? And, but then you have an election, and the election is controlled by the federal government. Primaries are not, they're controlled by the states. And so it's a really weird system and hard to understand. And particularly people outside the US they're
Yes.
fascinated
Yep.
because, like, here we are, what, 200, we're 220 years old, something like that.
Yeah.
250 years
No,
old, 150
yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
250.
250. Like, we've lasted longer than any other
Yeah.
governmental system, right?
Okay, well, let's take this into the future, because I think we dodged a bullet, literally dodged a bullet, and that and it's not going to be Trump who saves us. I think the idea that Trump is a savior is a faulty idea. I think one of the benefits of Alexander Hamilton and these other founding fathers is that we have a decentralized system, and that decentralized system was supposed to be decentralized, and it's great that it's decentralized. And there was this creeping federal government that started to become more and more centralized. And I think now we're in the age where technology, going back to our original theme, is about to go like this. And then our system is no longer able to go like that. The centralized part of it. And so it's going to decentralize, and it's going to allow for experimentation at both the state level, and this is the craziest thing that I found out in the last few weeks, is that people talk about the rise of government spending. Actually, federal spending has been pretty linear. Local spending is the thing that's gone crazy. So the local governments are the
So you're
actual.
saying percentage of the GDP, or?
Yeah. Let me. I hope I can find it. No, I won't be able to find it. But essentially, we've got federal, we've got state, and we've got local governments. The local governments are actually the biggest rise. So when people say, like, Obama, increased government spending, he like just kept federal spending, but it all trickled down into the local states or the states and local environments where they started to
State and
spend.
local are two very different things too,
No, no,
because
I'm saying I'm not.
there
I'm not
was
saying.
no income tax before 1920. So the federal government was entirely funded by tariffs and tax, sales taxes and not sales taxes, but
Yeah,
tariffs almost
yeah.
entirely.
Wait.
And
So I want to. So Trump is talking about bringing back tariffs. What do you think of this? What's your take on?
tariffs were the way we used to operate,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
If you go back 150 plus years ago, governments raised money by charging import duties and tariffs. And there was no
Mm,
tax, right? They didn't. We just assumed that it was always an income tax, or that there's always Social Security. All of these things are modern, i.e., post 2020, 1920.
1920. Yeah, yeah.
And so, so it's really important to go back and look at that, because the other thing was schools were 100% funded by local property taxes.
Yep.
And so people paid tax on their property, and that funded the schools, like a really tight connection between where their kids went to get educated and what they were paying,
Yep.
which has changed. Now states actually cover like 60 or 70% of the cost of, so now it's centralized at the state level, and the state legislature controls what's put on the curriculum. And, it's like an intense change from where we were originally, where
Yep.
local control was that started with local, right?
Yep.
And then states had it was kind of a loose organization at the state level and an even looser one at the federal level. So yeah, it's all gone upstream. But even now, the federal government only provides about 8% of the cost of education. It's the states that control, which is why there's such a delta in different states.
So yeah, yes, I agree with all that. And also, there is this growing connection between the federal, state, and local governments, where the federal government did start to have a much tighter connection with both of those other two. So the Department of
What
Education.
happened was the federal government started making subsidies from the feds to
Yep.
the states,
Yep.
depending on what the states did, right?
Yes. Exactly.
So you would not get highway funds
Yep.
if you weren't politically correct, right? The highway fund, the thing that started in the 50s, is one of the biggest boondoggles ever. But we ended up with this huge interstate system, and the federal government used that, not right in the beginning, but eventually they started saying, no, you can't get federal funding for highways and they did this in New Mexico. I remember this because New Mexico had the worst DUI thing, and the federal government said, you have to stop letting people drunk drive if you want funding for your highways.
So okay, so yes, so there's a few different places we can go to this, which is one of
What
which
do we
is
put a pin in? Do you remember what we put a pin in?
well, there's a bunch of things we put in a pin in.
You said let's put a pin in that.
Oh, the structure of government. We got into that. We got into the structure of government. We could talk about the media, and we could talk about AI in terms of how it will change media. We've talked about this a bunch of times, which is the lack of trust now. But what do you think about my premise that it's all like the technology is going to go like this, and our government structures are not going to be able to go like this at the federal level, but we're now entering a world. Have you heard of the network state? Are you familiar with the network state?
I don't know, because I don't know what you're referring to, but like the Terminator was the network state.
No, not nothing like that. No, so Balaji Srivastavaran wrote a book called The Network State. A lot of people say that he ripped off the idea from earlier book from the 90s called The Sovereign Individual. Both of these books essentially go into what happens when the industrial age starts to collapse and the information age starts to rise. And I would say that we're now fully in the information age. I do not think that we're in the industrial age anymore. And so in the information age, we have networks of like-minded individuals. So how this relates to our conversation networks of like-minded individuals who are able to move across the globe somewhat freely, depending on how much money you have. As I've been learning in terms of getting Argentine residency, just in terms of the documents, I think I've spent now $500 or $600 just in the documents. And so, and that's like a hidden cost. Nobody tells you that up front. Like you have to, yeah. But so networks of individuals who are able to have free movement. Some of who represent the knowledge work, the ability to go things like some of the founders that you invest in, say, oh, okay, you know what? I don't like San Francisco anymore. I'm going to move. I'm going to move to Texas. And Texas offers these advantages, or I'm going to move to Argentina.
I wish I'd invested in those companies because I would have made a lot of money.
Why? Which one?
Ones that are all moving to Texas.
Yes, exactly. This is exactly what we're talking about. And both of us have now left San Francisco. I'm moving to Argentina because the network of people that I can access in Argentina gives me more joy than the network of access that I could get in San Francisco. And so this idea that basically the whole thing is going to fracture and splinter. And the US is actually set up perfectly for this because we have states' rights and we have local rights. And there's a whole system where people can move to places like Texas. But it's also going around the world so that it's not necessarily the United States, but the United States can serve as the laboratory again. That's what I'm excited about.
So, okay, I just looked up network side and I see what you're saying. One of the interesting parallels is not the revolution, but the Civil War. So this is one issue in the Civil War, slavery, led the country to split into two parts, and they were done geographically, right? The South and the North. And there was a little bit of stuff on the edge because we hadn't gone west yet. But and this led to a war with people shooting each other and secession and all that. And the only reason it got resolved is the North won, subjugated the South to the North, to the United States of America, recombined after that. There's a whole lot of collateral effects that happen after that because Lincoln got shot and a lot of the basic theory of Republican theory didn't actually get implemented, but which led to racism and a lot of other issues in our society. And now we're in a place where people are moving. So there's this like sub phenomena of people living. I live in a blue state. This is where I came to why I wanted to talk about politics. I've always lived in a blue state. I was born in Washington, D.C., which is always blue. I moved to Massachusetts, which is always blue. Then I moved to California, which is, well, particularly San Francisco, which is always blue. And then I moved to New Mexico, which is now always blue. The one time I might not have lived in a blue state was when I went to school in Los Angeles, because I lived in a working class neighborhood called Eagle Rock in Los Angeles. It's not anymore a working class. It's been gentrified last 8+ years. But I lived in it, and I lived in housing where I paid like $100 a month for a 3-bedroom house. It was ridiculous. And so I drove a taxi cab and joined the union for 3 years. And so the only experience I might have had of not being in a liberal leftist kind of environment was maybe while I was going to school, but I was in Youngstown College. It was a liberal enclave inside of a working class neighborhood. And so I think of myself as like, wow, I've never actually experienced needing to move because I'm surrounded by like-minded people. Other people have to move, and they are. And some of them are moving to take those people moving from San Francisco, Texas. It's already reversed. The Miami was the other destination, and that's already fallen away. Like nobody's moving to Florida anymore. And the only place they were moving to in Texas was Austin, which is a little blue.
Is it blue? No,
So
this is a great
this
territory.
whole thing, though, there is this phenomena of red states getting redder and blue states getting bluer, but it's not geographic. It's like it's really confusing. Can we have a civil war where people live all over the place and are shooting each other?
No. I think we already went through the Civil War. So I think we already went through the event that everybody was scared of from 2008 to 2020. I think the pandemic was a civil war, but it wasn't a civil war in the industrial age sense. It was a civil war in the information age sense. And I'll give you a
Network,
direct
what
example.
you're
Yeah, yeah.
calling network sense, right?
Well,
We live
yep,
in our ecosystems and listen to
yep.
people that think like us, and we
So
don't see the other side.
this is so interesting because I got this from you. I I loved San
It's all
Francisco
my fault.
when what's that?
It's all my fault.
It's all your fault. Well, no, no, I love this. I love this.
Parents have to live with that. Yeah.
Well, no, this is actually something that, and I think there's a mirror that can help you to understand what this is as well, which is that you were living in blue states, but you said you self-identified as a conservative, but you felt most comfortable in the blue things. So I got that from you, where I was in San Francisco. I loved San Francisco. I loved what it was from 1995 when I first experienced it to 2020. And I loved the what I thought was the intellectual freedom, but the intellectual freedom got destroyed. And so where did I move? I moved to the only red county in California, one of the only ones since in Nevada County.
Oh, that whole northeastern
Yeah,
corner of
yeah,
California is red.
yeah. And so I had and at first I was drawn here. Well, so there's a lot of different things that go into it, but the I had to contend with the conservative, but deeply red conservative. What I don't think you ever did this, but a lot of other people in San Francisco treated the people that I'm surrounded in this county as the enemy, as the white hicks who essentially were like not who weren't doing anything. Um, uh,
Redneck.
Rednecks, yes, exactly, and they're not. They're like that was a character assassination from the elite that said like these people don't know what they're talking about. And so I was able to learn more about it. But you know what the big problem is for me in my life? None of the cities in the red states are beautiful, interesting cities. You know, the only city that I could find, which is now firmly in the what I see as the new future of the conservatives, and not in the United States only, Buenos Aires. It's only Buenos Aires. It's the only beautiful city.
You're ignoring a few stops along the way,
Go for it.
like
Yeah.
Curitiba.
Of what?
Curitiba.
Well, Curitiba is an interesting. So Curitiba is a nice city. It's a comfortable city, and for the listeners, Curitiba is a city in the south of Brazil, which is actually a very. It is more like the northeast of the United States in the sense that it's more factory, more industrial. It was industrialized in a way that allowed it to essentially have the higher GDP within Brazil. So Brazil is an opposite mirror of the United States. Brazil has the same, except it's north is where the slavery happened, south is where the industrialization happened. So Curitiba is a nice city. Curitiba is a beautiful city, but it's not an interesting city. And Buenos Aires is an interesting city, and the only reason why it's now a sort of more conservative-minded place is because it's like the DC of Argentina. It's Washington D.C. and it's now captured by Milei. And so while Buenos Aires is also a very liberal city, they're not in control anymore. And I think that's right because
yeah. There's only so far you can go by making parallels. You still have
yeah.
to do
Mm-hmm.
the sort of integral analysis of who we are, supposed to being like Argentina. Or anything else, right?
Well,
people constantly trying to go, well, we're like, we started with Britain, but we're not England, anymore. And but French should, and I have this all the time because Valerie's French, but
yep.
or your Uncle Joe is married to a German woman and loves Germany. And so, there are all these kind of parallels, but you have to go like, okay, you get back to the existential question is, what's it mean to be an American?
Well,
We're all somewhere else.
And this goes back to the network state in the United States. I'm a patriot for the United States. I love the United States. I love what the founding fathers did. Argentina copied the Constitution of the United States. They basically copied it and said, okay, we're that too. And so this is why, and then Brazil had a similar sort of thing. And this is why I go back.
Argentina and Brazil, Brazil is a little bit different because it started with Portugal, and it's Portuguese, but both Argentina and the U.S. are immigrant countries.
Yes. So and this is why I love being there, is because it's sort of like a secondary option that most people discount and this again goes to the whole Western Hemisphere. I think everybody in the Western Hemisphere has a very, very similar thing with little differences, and we're separate from those old people in Europe who are really going to town on their economies. Like, I think we in the Western Hemisphere represent a path for the new millennium, and in this sort of sense that Rome, we hopefully fixed the mistakes that Rome made, and we're now going to have a system.
But we lasted a lot longer than they did.
Yes.
But it is an existential question about the future of democratic society.
Yeah. But what? So the last question. So I don't know where I got this term, but everybody keeps on calling America a democracy, but it's not a democracy; it's a republic, right?
No, it's actually, we started as a republic, right? The original government formed was a republic, and it didn't work. So our Constitution wasn't written until like 1787 or something like that. That's when Alexander Hamilton came in, and the theory of checks and balances and a two-party system were put in place, and so we rejected the republic, and it didn't work because the states wouldn't get along. The 13 colonies wouldn't agree with each other, and there was no way to force that collective until we made a centralized federal government. And so when we became a federal government, that was a big change and fundamental to who we are. That federal government is, because it does have certain powers, eminent domain, military, defense, those things that could not be done by the states individually. But states' rights was a really critical part of it, right? There was a balance of power between the federal and the government and the states. And in the states, there was a balance of power between state and local. So why we have a really weird system that very few people can figure out.
I can understand. But it did something. It feels like it worked. I feel like it worked. It just worked, and
it survived a civil war. And that's amazing. 2 million soldiers were killed in the American Civil War, and yet we survived that. We're imperfect for sure, because like racism, all that kind of embedded stuff. That's a problem. We're actually better than most other societies, but we're still not. There's no perfect. There's no agreement on what perfect means. And that's the real essence of why we love America, because we're not perfect, but we kind of get along, and change happens slowly. And, sometimes that's bad, like the Democrats' creeping bureaucracy thing. And, that's why I'm sitting here going, he might be an asshole, but Trump might actually make things better. And we're watching it. Like, he just announced that he put in charge a guy of the FBI who thinks that the headquarters should be moved out of Washington, D.C., which is like, that's a really interesting idea. Maybe they should put the headquarters of the FBI in like the Midwest somewhere.
I'm actually very much in favor of that particular announcement. The fact that he knows it from the inside, and the fact that he agrees with what I believe to be true, which is that the deep state is is an existential threat to the American country,
to the very system that we have. Deep state. The problem is I know a lot of people, and I've met
in the deep state,
and there's no single person who represents the deep state.
That's why I said it's decentralized.
It's a thing, but not a. It's not like somebody's sitting there going, and this is what worries everybody about Trump, is they actually are thinking about it and want to turn it into a purposeful, intentional deep state.
And remove it. And this is where Milei comes in, because ultimately, I've learned in my many, many years of struggling to get all the right paperwork for bureaucracies, that the bureaucracy takes on a life of its own, and is only involved in its own existential existence, similar to a human. This is why I think that we have this sort of entity as a corporation. We've given corporations the same level of rights as an individual, is because these things take on a life of their own. And this aspect of the decentralization is so interesting, because you said it exactly right. There is no one person. Like, it doesn't matter who the FBI director is. Because the money and the actual bureaucrats who will who continue on. Doesn't matter who gets like elected. Like they'll just continue their jobs. They're the only ones who know how it works.
The FBI might be the wrong example to point to, but like the Social Security bureaucracy or
yes, yeah,
the regulatory bureaucracy, that there's this challenge in the Supreme Court, which I think actually got ruled on, called the something doctrine,
yeah, the
where
Chevron.
Chevron, yeah, the
Yep.
Chevron doctrine, which was, look, Congress can't deal with all the details. So in the executive branch, they're allowed to do a certain amount without any oversight. And it's not so much without any oversight, but they can interpret regulations passed by Congress. And in that interpretation, there's a lot of latitude, which means that that's really deep state thinking, because that means the bureaucracy can make decisions without any oversight,
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
lose
exactly.
check and balance. The ultimate in check and balances is the fact that the government's gotten too big for any one branch of it to figure out what's going on, you know,
Or us as citizens. This is the whole
not to
challenge
mention
that
citizens.
yeah,
Yeah.
we as citizens have no way to. And
But
it's not
we did.
how so.
More people voted for Trump,
Oh
and it
yes,
wasn't an
yeah,
electoral college decision. People said, "Fuck this. We want Trump.
yeah.
He's saying the right things."
And that gets back to the republic and the democracy, the idea that the republic is this thing where we elect representatives not in order to make those choices for us, because we can't possibly understand the complexity of this giant thing. Again,
We
going back to the
can only
founders.
decide who we want representing us.
Yeah, really interesting. I
Both
think
in the
next time we
White House
should talk.
and Congress. We don't get to choose the Supreme Court, and that's, you know,
Yep. But that's part of it, right? And that, as you just mentioned, the Supreme Court with this one little decision with Chevron opened up this possibility that we can go in and essentially clean up all the gunk inside of this system that's now archaic. Um, uh,
yeah.
and I think next time we should talk about how to look more into the future for this, specifically how it relates to technology, because I think, like it is archaic because we are now in the information age, and the information
Right.
age is the
So
new
should we
age.
do digital voting? Should we
Yeah,
eliminate the whole party apparatus and just like make decisions ourselves? You have a little form of that in California with the plebiscite
yeah,
system. And, in California, they have more um, direct voter control over everything that goes on in the state. And most people are sitting there going like, what the heck does this mean?
yeah.
Anyway, we can go way down this path,
Yeah,
because if we are in the midst of a change in political order,
yeah,
we could have a whole conversation about 5 years from now,
yeah,
five,
yeah, yeah,
to be going on. Is it JD Vance going to be president? Because Trump will term out, or he'll become king, or whatever. But
yeah,
we can talk about this,
yeah,
and you have to really push yourself out there,
yeah,
because who the heck could have predicted 5 years ago that Trump would become president again?
yeah. Well, I find that whole thing so interesting, but we'll do that. We'll save that for another time. Well, thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.